Okay, everybody, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to talk about U.S. military issued pilot survival knives. Now, the reason I'm doing this video right now is I just saw a video by a guy who did a review of what he thought was a U.S. military pilot knife, and the YouTube universe exploded in his comments telling him, what an idiot what he was. So he wasn't, and I'm going to show you why. But I figured we would start from the beginning. Now, during World War II, pilots carried a number of different knives, but a lot of times Navy and Marine Corps pilots carried Mark I's. So we've covered Mark I's pretty extensively, and after the end of the Korean War, roughly, the military decided they needed a new version of a pilot survival knife. So they started out with knives like this that were initially made with surplus parts from Mark I's. Now you'll see this blade looks a lot like a Mark I, right? This particular knife, let's see if I can get that on here, is made by Schrade-Walden. Now, this style of knife actually came in two styles. This is the second style. And the differences are exceedingly minor, right? The difference is the first style sheath did not have this rivet, okay? And the first style knife did not have a sharpened edge on the false edge on top. The second style does. So this is a solid second style knife. Now, these knives were initially, the United States government let the bid for these knives in 1953, and they were manufactured through 1957. And those knives were made by Schrade-Walden, Camillus, and Imperial. Now, I recently had an Imperial knife like this that was absolutely beautiful, and someone talked me out of it because everything has a price. So if you want to offer me a lot of money for a knife, I'll probably sell it to you. So these knives, like I say, the blades look very much like Mark I's. They have leather handles, and they have plastic spacers. Now these are the bid that was let by the government said it had to be high impact plastic in either black or brown. So clearly this is in brown. You will see a civilian version of this knife with a chrome bright polished blade, and the spacers here are red. Now those knives were made for the civilian market, but as usual, some of them made it into the military and were carried by actual pilots. So let me show you this. These are full, or I guess stick tang knives, right, that are peened, and it has a steel pommel, right, and a steel guard. Now some versions of these knives, this portion of the guard is turned down like an M3. You'll see those as well. And this knife clearly has had a little bit of use. It's got some dings on the spine. Now this sheath originally would have had a strap with a snap on it. It's a pretty well used knife, but it's a prime example of what a second pattern post World War II pilot survival knife looks like. So the next ones we're going to look at are some Camillus knives that were used and carried also by the U.S. military. Okay, so what you have in front of you here are two Camillus made pilot survival knives. Now, from 1957 to 1962, Camillus produced this knife, which is an inch longer than this knife. So this is a 6-inch blade knife, and it is marked Camillus, New York. All right, it's got the not really a saw back, but more like a rasp back. All right, you can tell this one's been used. And in 1962, after numerous complaints by pilots that the knife was too long and kept jabbing them, they went to this knife, right, which is the same knife just with a 5-inch blade. All right, also marked Camillus. It's got the rasp back on it, right? This one also has the gray paint, which is typical of Air Force knives. So these knives were followed later by markings on the pommel, right? So unlike the previous knife, these knives do not have plastic spacers, and none of the following knives have plastic spacers either. So they have 2 holes. Oops. They have 2 holes in the guard, which is supposed to be used for lashing your knife to a stick, so you can use it as a spear to catch fish or something along those lines. The other purpose, I was told, for the sawback, was to use it to descale fish. Now, I have actually seen my father do that with a knife exactly like this. So these knives are interesting to me because this knife was the first, or this style of knife was the first real U.S. military knife that I was ever exposed to, and it was my father's survival knife. He was in the Air Force for 21 years. So he carried one while he was, nowadays we say deployed. Back then he was in Southeast Asia flying over Vietnam. He was not a pilot, he was an electronics warfare NCO. But so I kind of have an affinity for these knives. Now I'll tell you another war story. My brother, my older brother, was deployed to Saudi Arabia in 1991, and he took my dad's knife with him. And back in those days, we used to hang our combat knives upside down on our web gear because that was really, you know, a Joe Cool thing to do. And since my brother was with Aviation Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, he was leaning out of a helicopter over Iraq and dropped the damn knife, and it's somewhere in the desert in Iraq. And during all of my multiple trips to Iraq, I never found it. So, so anyway, so 57 to 62, and then in 62 they moved the marking. Okay. So this knife is a treat. I'll show you. So it is in fact new in the wrapper, right? And it is, I don't know if you can see that, Camillus Cutlery, January 1984. You can see this one has the metal plate, right, which is another way to keep the knife from going through the sheath and stabbing you. So here is the 1984 era Camillus knife. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. Camillus, New York, 2-1984. So February 1984, and the sheath was made in January. So otherwise identical to the knives that were made up to 1962. Okay, and of course this one is dry as a bone because it's Now, these knives are so popular that they have been copied for many years. Oh, also, this knife was manufactured by Camillus, obviously. Ontario, which still makes the knife for the U.S. military today, was made by Milpar and by Utica. Now, Ontario knives are available. Camillus knives are available. This one was a little more expensive because it's brand new, basically. But the Milpar knives and the Utica knives are stupid expensive for collectors if you go looking for them. I just saw a Milpar knife that wasn't in as good a condition as this Camillus, and it was selling for $190. So for me, that's just a little excessive, but that's just for me. So let's talk about commercial copies for just a second. Now, Japanese commercial copies abound. Okay. Now here's the cool thing about Japanese commercial copies. So these knives were for sale in the exchanges, and lots of GIs bought them. So you can see the clear differences, right? First of all, let's see Japan. No other markings. Right? The fuller is way tinier than the original knives. The guard is thinner, and the pommel is actually screwed on. Right? You can unscrew this. So the leather is, not quite all there, not all that compared to the American knives. And you can see the sheaths are flimsier, thinner, and the stones that go in the little pocket are thinner as well. So this is a cool knife because this knife belonged to my dad, this Japanese knife, and he did have it among his other things in Southeast Asia. Now, I refused to take it to Iraq and drop it in the sand. Here's another copy that I picked up. It's in slightly better shape, and as you can see, it has more pronounced fuller, but still not nearly as deep. It's pounded, right? It's not milled. Still has the thin guard and the screw-on pommel. Now, you see this one has a maker mark on it. This one is also made in Japan, and it says, see if I can do that, Roscoe, and then lightly underneath it, Japan. So Roscoe and a diamond, and that was an American retailer. So these knives, the rasp on the back is a little bit more pronounced, and it's canted at an angle, which I actually prefer. So if you're looking for a knife you can beat the hell out of and actually use, and they are high carbon steel, they will take a good edge. They're out there relatively inexpensively. Now, the last commercial copy that I'm going to show you is made by Ontario. So Ontario makes U.S. military aircrew survival knives, okay? And they look very much like this, right? I mean, they're essentially identical to this, okay? They look very much like this. Now, this knife sells for about $35. You can find them, on eBay and so forth. And they come in a different style of packet, which I had to dig out of the trash so I could show you. But it comes in a little blister pack like this. All right, and it's called a 499 Mod Survival Knife. Nowhere does it say, pilot knife or anything like that. So here's the thing I want you to look at. Item number 6612TC. So if you buy this knife, you are not buying the U.S. military issued Ontario pilot survival knife. This knife is much cheaper. It's basically crap by comparison, right? It's also less expensive. Now you see this right here, made in the USA. So when I saw Ontario Knife Company, made in the USA, and this knife, I bought it. I thought I was getting a deal, but I wasn't. So let me show you this. Now, sheath made in China. If it said sheath made in China on the box, I wouldn't have bought it, because I would know it's not an actual U.S. military knife. So let's take a look at it. Of course, this one is also dry as a bone. The first thing that you notice about this knife is that there is no fuller on the blade. Also, the top edge is not sharpened. Right? It has the rasp. It has the handle, the little holes in the guard. Right? It has Ontario 311. Right? That's when it was manufactured. But you can see the fit and finish of this knife is just not there. In fact, the edge that comes on this knife is bad. There's a huge burr on it. Also, the sheath is way cheaper than what you would expect from an American knife. So, $35. Interesting thing about this blade, when I first saw the blade, I thought this is an ASEC blade. So these knives, these camel style or these pilot style knives were used up through the 90s. They're still being used, but we have a newer knife called an ASEC, Aircrew Survival and not evasion. It's called Egress Knife, right? Which means it's made to hack your way out of an airplane with. So the ASEC knife looks much like this, except that it also has serrations right here, and it has a heavy rubber handle and a point on the pommel. So maybe they're using ASEC blades for this. I don't know, but so all the guys that were, given that fellow who reviewed the knife that he bought, they gave him a ton of shit, and the fact of the matter is he was right. This knife is nowhere near the quality of the Ontario 499 Air Force pilot survival knife. So that's where I'm going to leave it, and thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you coming out. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed and this is the kind of stuff that interests you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I have plenty more knives to do videos on. I just started with these because those videos, the comments on that other guy's videos really kind of irritated me, because the people that were telling him he was wrong didn't actually know the truth. So, God bless America. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time here in Free America.